Minneapolis landlords have just dodged a major bullet as the Minneapolis City Council has killed the rent control proposal. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's an update about really the St. Paul rent control law that was passed, a little while back. And basically, St. Paul, Minnesota, and Minneapolis, Minnesota, they're right next to each other, and they are, both looking at rent control proposals at the exact same time. So St. Paul passed theirs, and it was a disaster. It was an absolute disaster as developers fled the city, as landlords they saw that they weren't going to be able to make any money, and they immediately tried to modify it. But the modifications, they're not enough. They don't go far enough, and they still make it so that landlords are extremely restricted in how much they can raise the rents. Okay, and this is going to make it so that there's a very large amount of investment that's just going to leave. They're not going to want to build new properties there, even if they are temporarily allowed to, increase the rents up to market rates, depending on how new the building is. In the long run, there's going to be a lot less development, a lot less landlords, less rental units as people flee to the other surrounding cities, counties, states that do not have those rules. Okay. Now, Minneapolis, they didn't pass their rent control proposal just as quickly, right? So, fortunately, they've been studying what happened in St. Paul, and they've been saying, oh, you know what, this isn't what we thought it was going to be. We didn't think that, it was going to be passed like this. And, there were members of the St. Paul City Council who said, hey, we're not for this. We want to, nix this thing because we don't want our development to get killed the same way that it happened over in our, neighboring city. So what happened was some of the city council members were out of the office essentially for a religious holiday, and all of those people were the people who were in support of the rent control. So the people who were against rent control, they realized that, hey, we have the majority just while these people are gone. So let's vote on this proposal right now and, just toss it in the garbage, right? And that, it was a smart thing because you have to do what you have to do in order to make these sort of things happen, okay? So they got the rent control bill killed, and unfortunately now, there's these people, and they're upset about the way they went about doing it. But I'm all in favor of making sure that these proposals do not pass. Okay, we don't want to see more of this happening. These, like I said, they're development killers. They destroy affordable housing. They make things worse for cities, and especially in an area kind of like Minneapolis, where there's tons of suburbs around. There's lots of counties. There's multiple states. People will vote with their feet essentially. Okay, and developers will say, hey, we're going to build in the neighboring city that doesn't have rent control. Or landlords are going to say, we're going to buy properties over here where there is no rent control, where we're going to sell our single family homes to owner occupants. We're going to convert our buildings to condos. We're going to, you know what I mean? People don't want this. And only the naive and those who don't understand economics believe that this sort of thing will work and will actually help things. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. What do you think of the city of Minneapolis actually killing their rent control proposal? Are you surprised? I'm certainly surprised. I do think that this will be a issue that was going to constantly come up. I think it's going to come up again. I just don't know exactly when. Hopefully not anytime soon. So anyway, let's get into this article. This article is coming from apnews.com, and it says, with Muslim members away for EID, Minneapolis City Council kills rent control measure. And you have to forgive me, I don't know what this EID is. It's a Muslim holiday, I guess. And the Muslim members of the city council were away for this holiday, right? So anyway, let's get into the article, see what it says. While 3 Muslim council members were away to observe the Eid al-Adha holiday, forgive me, the Minneapolis City Council narrowly voted to kill a measure that would have put a rent control question on the ballot this fall. The majority of the council supports a 3% annual residential rent cap, but with Aisha Chugtai, Jeremiah Ellison, and Jamal Osman out on Wednesday, the council voted not to move the measure forward, the Minnesota Public Radio reported. Islamophobia, one person in the audience blurted out during the meeting, the Star Tribune reported. Such accusations raged on Twitter, while at the same time, rent control opponents expressed relief the issue was off the table. Yeah, so they sit there and, they want to cry, whatever, racism or whatever. This has nothing to do with racism. This is about economics, okay? The economics of rent control do not work. The math does not work, okay? Every time they implement a rent control policy, housing becomes less affordable. It becomes less available. And there is going to be no exception if they passed it in Minneapolis. So this isn't a racism issue, okay? And I hate it when people scream that every time something doesn't go their way. That's just an easy cop out because you don't want to actually argue the issue. The Wednesday meeting was scheduled more than a year ago to accommodate EID, which at the time had been predicted to fall on Thursday, Minnesota Public Radio reported. But the date is subject to change depending on lunar observations. According to City Clerk Casey Carl, the first time anyone raised a concern about EID was on Monday, too late to change the date of the council meeting under state law, the Star Tribune reported. Carl apologized, but added that for years, the city clerk's office has relied on council members to make it aware of religious or cultural conflicts. Like, you know what? They didn't do this intentionally. Yeah, they did do the vote intentionally, right? But like I said, if you are in the minority and you find something to your advantage, then take advantage of the situation. Okay, and that's exactly what they did in this case. Now, keep in mind, this is Minneapolis, Minnesota. None of the people on the council are conservative by any means, right? These are all people who are more left leaning. So they are looking, though, at what will best benefit the city overall. And rent control is not that thing. It will never be that thing. And it's more problems than it's worth. So I don't want to see any sort of rent control proposal passed anywhere. And I'd love to see these proposals tossed out in the places where it already exists. But if you notice, you never see these laws getting tossed out, okay? Or very, very rarely. I won't say never, but it's very rare when you see a rent control law that is overturned and it's returned to regular market rate rents. And why is that? Because the entitlement is too hard to take away. And this is the same problem with all of these socialist entitlements, right? Once you start giving somebody something for free or giving somebody, some huge savings on something, and then you try to go back to the regular system, the way the system is supposed to be, people just aren't willing to, do away with it. They aren't, okay? They'll be up in arms over it. They'll swear up and down they can't live without their entitlement, without their free or their heavily subsidized rent. And you know what? That's a big problem. That's a big problem because there's not ever going to be a way to move away from this if we implement these laws. And that's why I am so opposed to them getting put into place in the first place. In a statement released after the vote, Ellison, Osman, and Chugtai criticized the vote as going against the spirit of inclusion Minneapolis prides itself on, adding that council leadership could have scheduled the meeting at a later date, delayed the vote to the next full council meeting, or advanced the policy to committee for further changes. Yeah, so they could have done all that, but they didn't, and they didn't do it on purpose because they knew that once you were gone, they would be able to get rid of this rent control law and toss it into the garbage where it belongs. And that was the only way that was going to happen. If they had rescheduled the meeting and then you had been there, then you wouldn't have let that happen. So why would they have done that? Okay. Anyway, one good piece of news for landlords. Obviously, I still wouldn't want to invest up there in Minneapolis just because I still see this sort of thing as coming. Okay. And even if this specific law didn't pass right now, we're going to see stronger tenant protections, making it harder for landlords to evict. They're going to make more rules and more regulations and make it even more difficult for us to operate our businesses.